Welcome to the podcast, Let the Prophet Speak. Today we continue our study of the second book of Samuel, that is Shmuel Bet. We are up to chapter 15, that is Perek Tet Vav. And we completed the last chapter where one might have thought that there was some kind of rapprochement between David and Avshalom. Yoav tried to bring the two of them together, but we pointed out that it was an extremely cold reception, no emotion, no real bonding, no real reconciliation between the two. We just simply, the king kissed Avshalom and that was it. And in case you were skeptical about this, about that supposed reconciliation, the proof will be in the pudding that the reconciliation was absolutely meaningless and completely on the surface, based on what's about to happen. So here we read verse 1 in chapter 15. Vayihi me'achrei Cain. It was after this, in other words, after what we just read about, that Avshalom and David supposedly made peace. Avshalom began to embark on the project which David was afraid the whole time he was going to embark on, which was the project of taking over the kingdom. And deposing his father. Vayaslo Avshalom merkava v'susim. Avshalom made for himself a rider, a chariot, and horses. V'chamishim ish ratzim lefanav, and had 50 men running before him. So he started treating himself like royalty, as if he was a king. This was a symbol. This was the kind of thing that was a symbol of being a king. V'hishkim Avshalom. Avshalom would wake up early in the morning. Presumably he woke up early in the morning because people would start lining up to see the king, to King David. As we saw, the woman from Tekoa earlier in the last chapter was able to get an audience with the king. This is the way it worked in those days. You waited online in the king's court until he called you in. You presented your issues, whatever they were, and he issued whatever decision it was and took whatever action he needed to take. But Avshalom got up early, and he stood outside the gate where people would walk in towards the king's palace. Every person who had some sort of an argument, some sort of a lawsuit, an issue to bring to the king, la mishpat, for judgment. Vayikra Avshalom elav, and Avshalom would call the person over, Vayomer, and he would say, Emi ze'ir ata, where do you come from? What city? Vayomer, and he would answer, Me'achad shiftei Yisrael avadacha, from one of the tribes of Israel. That's where your servant comes from. In other words, this is just an example of the type of conversation that he would have with the people that were coming to see the king. Vayomer elav Avshalom, and Avshalom would tell him, Re'ei divarecha tovim u'nchochim. It sounds like you have a really good case and they're proper. Again, Avshalom knew right away how to talk to a person to butter them up. Obviously, whether a person's case was good or not was something that wasn't yet determined because it hadn't yet been brought before the judge. But Avshalom would say, oh, this sounds like you have a really good and important case, and you're saying good, so to speak. But no one's going to listen to you, right? Or no one is yet listening to you from the king. Apparently, there was some hesitancy on the part of David, the mood that he was in, how David had started to seclude himself, and his depression, and which we have seen, his desire to simply, his lack of action is better to say, and his silence in the face of action that needed to be taken is becoming a pattern of David's behavior as a result of what had happened with Bathsheba. We saw he was silent in the face of Amnon's despicable act. He was silent in the face of Avshalom's despicable act. He was silent when Avshalom was absent. He needed to be spurred on by a woman from Tekoa in order to do what was best for the nation, and he did it half-heartedly. So apparently he was also doing the same in his public duties as king. He was not giving people audiences, at least not as much as he should, not paying attention. And I would like to point out, in his discussion with the woman from Tekoa, his first action was to hear her petition and then say, I'll get back to you. right? And which basically means this was his behavior. His behavior was such that he wasn't making decisions. And Avshalom was saying, no one's listening to you at the king. I'm here. I got up early. I'm standing here. Vayomer Avshalom, and Avshalom said, Mi yisimeni shofet baretz. If only they made me the judge. Remember the shofet, this is the role of the king. V'alayavo kol ish. And then to me, everyone can come to me, asher yelo rivu mishpat v'hitztaktiv. Anyone that has any kind of argument or judgment issue, and I can make sure to hitztaktiv. I can make him just. In other words, I can bring him justice. And if anyone came to bow to him, in other words, to bow to him and show him deference, and hint to him that he would be willing, or maybe already is ready to make him the man in charge, he would put out his hand and hold him and bring him close and give him a kiss and a hug, bring him close. Avshalom was the absolute top-notch politician here. He knew exactly what David's vulnerabilities were, and he knew exactly how to exploit it. He knew exactly how to tell people, yeah, you're right, your case is good. Give them a hug and make them feel important and tell them, I'll fight for you, you just come to me. Avshalom did this to all of the people of Israel, that would come to the king for judgment. The king's giving judgment and giving audiences to the people was a crucial way that the king related to the people, and the king maintained his leadership over the people. People respected him because of this role that he played, and Avshalom is taking this, is bringing his opposition to the core of David's strength and taking that away. And therefore it says, Vayiganev, the end of verse 6, Avshalom stole at Lev Anshe Yisrael. He stole the hearts of the people, meaning stole them from who? Stole them from David and brought them to himself. Now the people wanted to support Avshalom. So Vayihimi Ketzar Bo'im Shana, it was at the end of 40 years. Now clearly this doesn't mean 40 years that Avshalom was doing this. This was the end of a 40-year period of time. Exactly what this period of time is, there's many different explanations as to what it might be. 40 years from when? So it could be one of the most understandable 40 years of David's kingdom. And if you work out the times, it's not exactly 40 years. It's roughly 38 or 39, but it's close enough to 40 that it makes sense that at the end of 40 years, so 40 years is a significant amount of time where David's kingdom has been established for this long. Vayomer Avshalom el Hamelach, and Avshalom said to the king, El chanav ashalem et nidri asher nadarti la'Adonai b'Chevron. He presented himself to the king, asking permission in a very innocent-sounding way. Let me go and fulfill my neder, fulfill my promise that I promised God in Hebron. Now, Hebron there's several things Avshalom is doing here that's very interesting and plays upon memories that were set in the Jewish heart and soul for generations until now. First, Hebron is, of course, associated with the forefathers Jacob. And we all recall when Jacob ran away from his father, Isaac, right? He made a promise to God that if you take care of me and bring me back here, right, I will fulfill my promise and bring you a sacrifice. That was one important thing. And so let's read chapter 8. And Avshalom is echoing Jacob when he says this to his own father. Ki neder nadar avdecha, because your servant, in other words, I made a promise, b'shivti b'geshur ba'aram lemar, when I was stuck out in Geshur, in Aram, when I was in exile, that im Yashov yeshiveni Adonai Yerushalayim, that if God brings me back to Jerusalem, v'yavadeti es Adonai, and I will serve God. So I have to fulfill that promise, and that is him echoing the forefather Jacob. Another thing that's important is why Hebron. Hebron has a tactical importance. Hebron is in the center of the strength and the power of the tribe of Judah, which is the tribe from which David derives most of his strength. It's his own home tribe. And going to Hebron would be a logical place for Avshalom to go to drum up support to take over for David. And a third thing is Avshalom is echoing by this story something in the past that David himself did. Remember when David came to King Saul and said, I'm going to go with my family to bring sacrifices to God. So these are things that have happened before. Avshalom is using a time-worn tactic here to go to another place and become king and crown himself king in that other place. A place where he can drum up support that's crucial to undermining David's base of support, but couching it in such a way that makes him sound all righteous and holy and special. So how could David refuse such a request? And therefore he says in verse 9, "Vayomer lo hamelech lech b'shalom." The king said to him, "Go in peace." Vayokom vayelech Hevrona. So he got up and he went to Hebron. So he went with permission from the king, and under the ruse of going to worship, going to pray to God, to thank God for saving him and bringing him back to Jerusalem, while his true purposes were much more nefarious than that which we're about to read. So we're continuing to read with verse 10 as we see I just want to remind everyone, we're continuing to see the unraveling of David's kingdom to the point where it's just about going to completely collapse. And all of this brought about by the sin with Bathsheba and its aftermath and the aftermath of the aftermath as it continues to spiral downward and downward and downward. Vayishlach Avshalom miraglim. Avshalom sent messengers, or the word miraglim is often used as spies. B'chol Shiftei Yisrael. In other words, it gives you the sense by you choosing that language instead of saying malachim or some other word. It uses miraglim to give us the idea that Avshalom is doing this in a bit of a surreptitious way to all the tribes, saying them. Kishamachem et kol hashofar. When you hear the shofar sounding, v'amartem, then you should say Molach Avshalom b'Chevron. Avshalom became king in Hebron. Now remember, Hebron also, I forgot to mention before, is the place where David's kingdom started. For the first several years, Hebron was the capital. So again, it would make sense for Avshalom to use that as his base to start his being a kingdom. So in other words, when the shofar is sounded, then we're in. And he had his men set among all the tribes, ready to declare Avshalom the king. Vet Avshalom halchu masayim ish mirushalayim korim v'holchim letumam. He took with him 200 men going innocently, v'lo yadu chol davar. They did not know. The point being, demonstrating to us the point that in Jerusalem, in Yerushalayim, the hearts of the people were still with David, which we're going to see as this chapter continues. David maintained his support within Jerusalem, but even when one gets to Hebron, which is very close to Jerusalem, right, one already finds apparently the support of David waning and the support of of Avshalom beginning to grow. So when Avshalom took 200 people with him from Yerushalayim, the verse is pointing out to us that they came innocently thinking that Avshalom was simply going to Hebron to fill his neder, to fill his promise to God, to worship God in Hebron, as he said. So they came not knowing that they were going to be part of a scheme to overthrow David. Vayishlach Avshalom et Achitofel Hagiloni yoetz David me'iro migilo. Avshalom then sent for a key figure here, Achitophel from Gilon, right, who is David's trusted advisor. Achitophel was known as a wise advisor to David, someone who David relied upon for good advice. He took him from his city, from Gilo, which is very close to Jerusalem. So Achitophel remained kind of on the edge. We also know that it's most likely that Achitophel was the grandfather of Bathsheba. I'm forgetting. I think his son's name was Achinoam, I think, and his daughter was Bathsheba. So Achitophel had a particular, would have, in theory, at least most likely, had some serious misgivings about David and what he had done to his granddaughter and to his grandson-in-law, to Uriah Hachiti. So by Avshalom realized that Achitophel would therefore be a potential, really important potential ally for him, and that he can exploit Achitophel's uh, likely anger at David, and in order to bring Achitophel to his side. So this is again a very wise political move on the part of Avshalom, and this is going to play out in interesting ways, as we'll see as we read through the story of Avshalom's rebellion. So he took him bizavcho et hazvachim. When he, so to be there while he brings these sacrifices in Hebron, as he had planned to do. Vayihi hakesher amitz, and the conspiracy. The kesher here is literally the conspiracy that the people had, which at this time is still in secret, and some people are in the know and some people are not. It's unclear if when he called Achitophel, if Achitophel even knew that this was a conspiracy, but it was getting stronger and stronger. And the nation that surrounded Avshalom was growing stronger and larger. More and more people were supporting Avshalom and his rebellion. And the Hamagid means the person who said. In other words, we're not bothering mentioning who this was because it doesn't matter. It was a person who came to David and said, Haya lev ish Yisrael acharei Avshalom. The people of Israel. Now, ish Yisrael in Tanakh is often used to connote the leaders, the people with the opinions, the movers and shakers, or in modern parlance, the influencers. They're all running after Avshalom. Avshalom's political campaigns and is starting to bear fruit, and people are supporting him. Vayomer David l'chol avadav. What does David do? Now, this is interesting. David is going to do something that can be interpreted, and on the surface makes one feel like that it was kind of cowardly, right? And I'm going to read this to you, and then you can think for yourself, and I'll of course share what the feelings that come out of this verse are. But we're supposed to get, I think, the feeling that this is a little bit of a cowardly move, but in a moment I'm going to explain it to you in a way that will understand David's thinking and why this was a very interesting move. He tells everyone that Asher Ito, his servants that are with him, be Yerushalayim. Remember, in Yerushalayim, the sentiment of the people was still supporting David. Kumu v'nivracha, let's get up and run. Kiloti alonu pleitam ipnei Avshalom, because we will not be able to be saved from Avshalom. In other words, when he comes back to Jerusalem with all of his men and now getting the support of all the people, he's going to attack us, he's going to kill us. Anyone that supports me and anyone that's with me, he's going to kill. We got to get out of here. We won't be saved. Right now, we are not powerful enough to fight Avshalom. Maharul alechas, we need to hurry and leave. Penyi maher v'hisiganu, because if he hurries, he might catch up to us. And he will cause terrible things to happen, and he will strike down this entire city by the sword. Now, this is remarkable because, on the one hand, we tend like to think of the hero is the one who stands up. David should have stood up for what was right and told the people to fight back against Avshalom to the last man. And we like this. This is what sounds good in the movies, and it's what goes over well in the heroic, epic sagas of the one who stood up for what's right and everything. But David was much smart. David was much smarter than that. David realized, exactly as he stated, that the people of the nation, the majority of the people, are against us. If I stay here, the entire city will be slaughtered. There would be a battle. Remember, David was not a coward when it came to a fight, right? But he understood that a fight that one is sure to lose doesn't make sense to fight. Better to back away so that at least the city can be saved, the people in the city can be saved, and we can always come back and fight later if we have to. But right now is not the time. Let's get out of here so we can avoid a conflict that will simply result in death and destruction. Vayomer avdei hamelech el hamelech. What David would have done had the story of Bathsheba not happened in this kind of situation is something interesting to think about. But this is what he did do in the situation that he was in. And one can argue whether it was good, bad, in between. But this is what happened. Vayomer avdei hamelech el hamelech. The servants of the king said to the king, K'chol asher yivchar Adoni hamelech hinei avadecha. whatever you, our master the king, says, here we are your servants. We are ready to do as you state. You tell us to retreat, we will retreat. So Vayetzei HaMelech v'chol beito, this is verse 16 now. The king and his entire household went biraglov, they went by foot. Vayazov HaMelech et Esther anashim pilakshim l'shmor habayit. And he left 10 of his concubines to keep guard on the house. Now, what is the purpose? Why did he leave the concubines behind? So that would be presumably the reason. I mean, obviously this is all conjecture, but one gets the sense that the reason for leaving the concubines behind is so that the king still has a presence. Right? He's leaving, but he's not totally leaving. There's still a presence in Jerusalem of David. He wouldn't imagine that his son would violate these concubines. By leaving them there, they are his wives. He's leaving the house in the hands of David, but in such a way that David is hoping to avoid conflict, but also leaving a mark of his royal family on the palace. And the king and all of the people that were following him went out, and they stopped at the final house at the end of the city. So they kept on going until they were almost at the end of the city and about to exit the city. And at this point, and what happens at this base, we're going to read in the next podcast. Before David actually leaves the city completely, there's some negotiations and some issues that are going to happen in the next podcast. But let's just finish verse 18. All of his servants were passing with him. And the kreti and the pleti, which is assumed to mean like his shock troops, his like royal guard. The kreti and the pleti would be the high level guard of the king's guard, v'chol hagitim, and all of the Gittites. So the Gittites are presumably Philistines. The Philistines had been subdued as a nation. And remember, David had a special relationship with the people in Gat. Remember, he sought refuge there. And apparently many of the people of Gat swore loyalty to David. And even though they weren't part of the people of Israel, they were loyal servants of David. Sheish me'ot ish, there were 600 people total. Asher bo'u b'raglo migat, that came from Gat to go with David and to be with him. So there was a significant contingent of people from Gat that were not Judahites, or Israelites, but they were allies of David. Ovrim al pnei hamelech, they were passing before and with the king, marching with the king out of Jerusalem. So this concludes the first half of chapter 15. Looking forward to studying the second half of chapter 15 together with you, and of course the entirety of this beautiful book of Shmuel as we read the continued unraveling of David's monarchy. Thank you so much for studying together. Have a wonderful day.